Thank you, Jeanette. So let's enjoy the time and expertise and insights graciously offered to us by Gwen Blodgett. And Gwen, at this moment in our time, we are all yours.
Well, thank you, Ken. That's quite the introduction. I'm really glad to be here and to kind of share my story and my journey. And I hope that through sharing this, you might walk away with some insights that maybe help you with your own journey or help you help others with your journey. Growing up in the church, we often had those scandalous testimonies that everybody loved to listen to, and most of the time it was nothing more than just kind of showing off some sort of story or entertaining folks. And while I do have some rather scandalous sides to my story, some interesting stuff, I don't want to share my story just for entertainment. I prefer to help provide some insight into the thought process of a very devoted evangelical pastor's wife, someone who was a proponent of purity culture, who strove to live the straight and narrow, and how I left that, and how being a nudist has actually helped me heal from some of the shame and scars from that entire process. I am open to, I'm going to have a couple of discussion points as we go through the slides. So I encourage you to engage in those times. I will time box it so we can get through that and have a nice chunk of time for questions at the end. Looks like we have someone who lost audio. Oh, and in order to share screen, I'm going to need someone to give me permission. I think if you make me a co-host, if you make me a co-host, I should be able to share.
Okay, let me see. Hang on here a second. Oh, what is this doing right now? I don't know. Something's happening. What that? I don't know. I did something. Hang on here a second.
Okay.
And I don't know how to get rid of this. How do I get rid of this? Am I sharing my screen?
Yes.
I mean, beyond, can you see my arrow moving around?
No.
Okay.
No, I think we just see you talking. Are you able to get to the participant list?
Well, there's something here that I don't know what it is. Let me get, I don't know what this, why that popped. There we go. That's gone. Hang on here a second.
All right.
I
We'll
think
get it.
I'll figure it out. Let me.
Is there a 10-year-old nearby? That's usually what I need.
I think find. Hang on, Gwen. I think I've got this figured out now.
Okay, cool.
Okay, I'm going to make you the host. And I see if you can share.
All right. I should be able to share now. And there we go. If I did that correctly, you should be able to see.
Nudist life.
Yes. And I am going to see if I can just. All right. Okay. So, so this talk that I've got is, oops, now I've got the Zoom crazy guy. So this is a picture of me in front of my house. I am a full-time nudist. I live here in Hudson, Florida. So I'm just on the other coast from you. And I live in a clothing optional community. It is a family resort. So we do have children and families. We're part of the American Association of Nudist Recreation, of Nude Recreation. And it is about freedom, freedom of your body, freedom of expression, not about sex. I do know where the naked sex places are. So if you want that info, message me later. But today we're going to focus on the healthy aspects of being a nudist. I've lived here for about 5 years. I grew up mostly in New England. And again, that's where my last name Blodgett came from. So I love this little meme. It says, when I said to wear regular weekend attire on casual Friday, I didn't know you were a nudist. I do get to work from home, so I do get to work naked most of the time. Although after the pandemic and everyone going to working from home and using Zoom, I had to start wearing clothes because I went on camera. I am wearing a little bit of something today because when it comes to being a nudist, it's all about having that social contract with others. So I'm not somebody who runs around naked in places that aren't okay to be naked. Instead, it's part of that social contract. So a little history on nudism. In fact, humans started living life naked. If you look at anthropology, history, or even the birth of your own children and grandchildren, we all start off without clothes. There's a lot of naked statues throughout history. This is a statue of the Egyptian Sphinx and a naked woman. It's in downtown of Dresden, Germany. You'll find in other cultures that views on nudity are a lot different than what we have here in our American, very heavily religious society. Nude beaches or topless beaches are not uncommon in Europe. And if you've read National Geographic, a lot of your tribal groups had no problem with nudity. Nudist movement actually started in Germany probably about 100 years ago and started taking a foothold in the States over about 70 years ago. A lot of the resorts that I visited started somewhere in the 50s or 60s. And again, we're primarily around the pleasure of just being outside with the sun and the wind and no shame associated with who you are or what your body is. A lot of people have a misconception about nudist communities. As a tip, we don't call them colonies. Colonies are for cults. We are resorts or communities or campgrounds because we embrace the individuality. It's about getting to know each other as people, not as whether or not you can afford Louis Vuitton or you shopped at Goodwill. Believe it or not, there are a huge number of nudist Christians out there. There are a lot of Christian groups that will even use the Bible to explain why they believe that living life naked is a absolutely pure, correct way to live. I do find it interesting when I hear them use their biblical explanations to explain their naturist life. However, it's for the most part, most of the nudist places that I visit, pretty much you check your politics, your religion, and your clothes at the door, and you interact with each other with respect and around nudist life. So I got into being a nudist after I had left religion, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about my history in a minute, but it came about sort of as a bucket list item and sort of as a dare. I had a 14-year-old daughter who was determined to cause as much trouble at the dinner table as possible by just saying the most outlandish things she could think of. And one day I decided to have my own outlandish statement and just said, hey, I picked our family vacation. We're going to a nudist resort. And she responded with, there's no such thing. And in the back of my head, I'm going, I'm pretty sure there's such a thing. And so it became the joke for a few years until eventually we took the plunge and visited a nudist place. My first day there, I actually listened to Seth Andrews on the way there. So it's an hour drive. And I had chickened out twice before, and I was determined to do it this time. And once we got there and had the drive around, it was not anything I had expected. It was basically just a campground and a lot of happy people. And we just, the partner I was with at the time, we said, all right, let's just do it. And within about 10 minutes, suddenly the freedom from not having to clothes and just being me was just great. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that as we go on. Going back to my growing up, I grew up with very black and white thinking. I was born into an evangelical Christian family. My father and my mother had Christianity going generations back. Both my mother and my father's side of the family arrived in the US in 1632. Both of them seeking some type of Christian freedom. My mom's side was more of a Puritan family. My dad's side was a little less so, but still very much about seeking religious freedom here in the US. And they passed it down from generation to generation. I grew up believing there was right and wrong, black and white, and that gray thinking, nuance, was the devil's territory. And for a lot of my life, very proud to say, yes, I am a black and white thinker. I don't know if any of you ever heard that phrase, the Bible said it, I believe it, that settles it. And we counted ourselves as being better than those folks because the Bible says it, that settles it. It didn't matter. We were very black and white thinking. Growing up in that environment, my favorite moment as a child, and believe it or not, I'm actually 12 in this picture. I've always looked younger than I am. I do have grandchildren who can drive. I'm not going to tell you exactly how old I am, but I'm older than I look. But I was Mary for the church pageant, and that was just like my ultimate dream. You know, I got to play Mary in the church pageant. I actually prayed the sinner's prayer when I was 5 years old at my bedside with my mom after a child evangelism fellowship track, and really took to heart the idea that I was a sinner and that I needed Jesus, and especially that anyone who didn't believe was going straight to hell and would burn for eternity. So the very next day, I locked my 3-year-old sister and her friend in a closet and told them that if they didn't pray this, hell would be even scarier than this dark closet I'd locked them in. Sadly, my sister is still very deep in that, and she still uses that as her salvation story. You know, it's I still have contact with my family, but my mom typically introduces me as her atheist daughter and will say to me, I'm really sorry I was such a bad mom that you turned out this way. For my parents, where you spend eternity is what matters the most. It really doesn't matter what else happens to you in life. It's where you're going to spend eternity. So that was the environment I was brought up in. And honestly, being out of that, there's times that I look back and have had regret over the things I did, especially locking my sister in a closet when she was 3. My only defense is I was 5 and really believed if I didn't do this, she would burn in hell. But I was born into a crazy maze of black and white thinking. And in looking back, I know that everything I did was motivated with the teaching that had been given me. So moving on, in my 20s, this was my first husband. So another last name for you, Ken. I was Levesque for a while as well. This was my ultimate dream. We were missionaries. And as a teenager, I had actually spent some time questioning. I had gotten into really studying the Bible, and I started having these doubts. And God seemed like the bad guy. The more I read, God seemed like the bad guy. And I went through about a year of rebellion. And during that time, I actually got pregnant. I lost that particular pregnancy, rededicated my life, came back to Jesus, all of that stuff. And then my senior year in high school, I was date raped and got pregnant again. And that time I did go forward and have the child. But I felt that my life was now second class Christian. Because of that black and white thinking, there was no true forgiveness for not having remained a virgin until I was married. The man I married was a virgin when we got married, and we spent a lot of our time doing talks about purity culture. And he would share the benefits of staying a virgin, and I would share the consequences of not remaining a virgin. And that carried a lot of shame as well. So when we were able to be missionaries, I felt like it was some type of redemption, some chance for me. In addition, I had the opportunity, I maybe should have given a warning, trigger warning, clowns can be scary for folks. One of the things I had done was taken my artistic desires and talents and become Happy the Clown. And my mom and I would do puppet shows and clown shows, and I did magic tricks and ventriloquism and made balloon animals. And honestly, there's probably nothing scarier than a clown in a park handing you a chick tract. Some of you may be familiar with chick tracts from the 70s. They're very, very judgmental and almost scary. And telling you you're going to hell if you don't love Jesus the way I do. And this picture was taken while I was serving with international teams, and dressed up and just really, really happy that I was getting a chance to serve God. What was overlying through all of that, though, was the shame of who I was as a person. There was shame because I was a woman. Simply because I was a woman, it was Eve who sin entered the world through. And as a woman, you were responsible for how men treated you. So even though, looking back, who I am now, can see where things happened to me that shouldn't have. At the time, I believed that it was because of my sin, my shame, that the bad things had happened. And so I lived with that, constantly trying to do my best, constantly trying to be someone better than what I believed I was. And thankful that the God who created everything would love me and sacrifice himself for me, even though I didn't deserve it. And there was just a lot of shame in that black and white thinking. And that's what breaks my heart still when, I was a helpline agent for RFR for a while, and hearing and seeing the talks come in, and just the amount of shame that religion can place on women for who they are. And actually, even in regular society, the shame about not having a body that fits the normal sizes. Maybe you're larger or skinnier, or you've got a long nose or big ears or whatever it is. Actually, my mom always said I had too big ears, and I tend to wear my hair down a lot because I still am sensitive about the big ears. And really, they're not that big. They just, my mom said they were. It's hard to unlearn that. So shame is one of those things that just carries with you. And Brene Brown said, where perfectionism exists, shame is always lurking. What I'd like to do is pause for a moment and see if any of you have any comments about how maybe black and white thinking has affected you, whether you grew up in a black and white religious world, or maybe a black and white secular world, but there was still very clear right and wrong.
So far, so good, Gwen. I'm loving how you're presenting your story. People, if you got a question, this is a good chance to address what Gwen has addressed so far. Shame. Anybody had what is shame? shame? Where does it come from? Do we create shame? Is it God? Is shame God-given? What's going on with shame?
I see a couple raised hands. Yelena? Yelena?
Hi, I'm in Jacksonville, Florida, and I grew up a Catholic.
Oh,
So
you know about shame.
do I need to say anything else? And the other thing about that is that, when I was a child going to catechism school, they also taught you that that was the only valid religion. I grew up in Colombia, in South America. So when I moved here, I moved to the land of the sinners. And then as I became a questioning teenager, and I came to certain conclusions from, just observing the data.
Yes.
Well, it was mind blowing. But anyway, I figure you'd get a laugh out of that one.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you for the presentation. It's really good. The other thing about black and white thinking is that it really affects your personal relationships because,
Yes. Yes,
kind
somebody
of
sliced the
apparent,
tomatoes wrong and you've got to teach them the right way to do it,
right? So
Yeah.
that was a tough, it was tough to overcome that. I mean, and now I see it everywhere. I see people who do it and I'm like, oh shit, run.
Yes. Yeah. And it's interesting, like every religious group seems to believe they're the ones who have it right. And I remember we used to tell this joke that, so and so got to heaven and was getting a tour, and they were shown where the Lutherans were, and they were shown where the Presbyterians were, where the Catholics were. And then they were told to be really quiet because they were going to walk by the Baptists. And they asked, well, why? And they said, well, they think they're the only ones who are here. But every group seems to think that they've got it right. Richard, I see you have your hand raised as well.
Yeah, I'm actually a preacher's kid, a Methodist minister's son. My father was a very academic and liberal guy. He'd been in the Navy in World War II, he learned religion via Aramaic, Latin, New Testament Greek, and then Hebrew. So he was very approached to the literary aspects of the religion. But I never really had pressure. The black and white thinking I experienced was more of the people I dealt with who saw me as the preacher's kid. And so on Boy Scout camping trips, I was always asked to say grace and, do all those kinds of things. Whereas, the dentist kid didn't have to check somebody's teeth, for God's sake. So maybe that started me on my path. I think, I'm not sure I ever believed any of it. It just seemed too ridiculous to me, too outrageous, the possibilities of, angels and somewhere up in the sky where people lived when they died. And I never really bought it. And then I later ended up marrying a woman in Jordan. She was Muslim on paper. And so I had to convert to Islam. I did it in Arabic, but didn't mean a damn thing to me. And she knew it. She didn't care. It was just for the cultural. It was because it could cause shame to her family in Jordan. And shame is a huge thing in those societies, especially for females, not for the men per se, but the females. And that's one of the reasons she's living in the States with me now.
Yes. Oh, well, I'm so glad that all worked for you too. Sometimes that doesn't have such a good happy ending. So
yes.
Yeah. No, thank you so much for sharing. Yes. My mom was the organist and my dad was the janitor, and I actually lived at the church for a couple of years in junior high. And the best part about that, if there's a best part, is like the church was our playground during the week, and we would play hide and seek under the pews. And I also got paid to scrape the gum off the bottom of the pews. So I got a penny for a piece of gum. So it was a while ago that happened. And being the devious kid I was, I soon learned that if the gum broke in half, then it was 2 pennies, not just one. But
Well, with my teenage friends, we hang out in my father's office during the sermon. So I had
Yes.
special privileges.
yeah. Oh, one Sunday, my cat got into the sanctuary and walked across the baptismal behind the pastor while he was preaching. That was, oh, sometimes. Anyway, not that that's it. Anyone
you.
else have something to share on black and white thinking?
Well, Kevin Myers.
Yes, Kevin.
I think I'm off mute now. Yeah, I definitely can relate to the whole idea of the black and white thinking and the shaming and all that kind of stuff. And the way it kind of manifested itself for me was, I was like, no, this just doesn't make sense, doesn't make sense. But the whole shaming part and the community of it and everything left me in a place where I was desperate to want to believe. I was like really, really trying to believe, to fit in, to be able to, why isn't this making sense for me? To the point where I just was like, no, it doesn't make sense. And it's not for me, but that whole struggle in the middle there of desperately wanting to believe was a rough patch. So, yeah.
No, I can definitely relate to that. I, after I had my daughter, I felt a need to get closer to God. And so I decided to go to Bible school. And I just decided to go to the strictest school that would let me in. So I went to Word of Life Bible Institute in upstate New York. And I still remember being there in this big wooden auditorium with almost 600 other students listening to the first lecture. And I started having doubts about whether the Bible was true.
Mhm.
And those thoughts and those things, I was having those doubts. And I still remember going, oh, I know what this is. This is Satan.
Right.
Satan's trying to trick me. The fact I'm doubting the religion is proof that the religion is true.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's, yeah.
Yeah, been there. Yeah.
Yes. All right. Well, we'll have some more discussion points and there'll be time for more question and answer later too. So fundamentalists believe the problem was eating from the tree of knowledge. Atheists believe the problem is cutting it down. And truly, it was the quest of knowledge that really helped bring me and set me free from this maze of crazy thinking. During my time as a Christian, just sort of a brief timeline. Again, in my teens, I had my rebellion. I came back to church, but then ended up a single mom anyway. I then got married, believing I still would never have God's best. We then went into missionary work. Later, we left the mission board and I put my husband through seminary and he became a Southern Baptist minister. And we had a church up in the Carthage, New York. It's almost to Canada. And then he was a children's pastor in Watertown, New York. Frank Peretti, some of you may be familiar with that Christian author. In one of his books, he made the comment that fundamentalist and manic depressive are a bad combination. And that's pretty much my first husband, who was the pastor. And I took the abuse without question because this was my bed. I'd made it. I didn't deserve anything anyway. And as my husband's mental illness became worse and untreated, I just prayed more and more and more. And it got to a point where at night he would threaten to kill me. And I would go to sleep praying, "Dear Lord, I trust you to take care of my children if he kills me in my sleep." That was the level of crazy belief that I had in God's control over my life. I look back at that and cringe, partly because of how vulnerable my belief had put me, and partly because I'm not the only one. Hundreds, if not thousands, of women are taught to accept abuse at the hands of their Christian husband and to do nothing but pray. I was a follower of Bill Gothard's teachings. If you're familiar with him, he's currently either in jail or about to go to jail for sexual assault. However, he taught that umbrella principle, that children were under the spiritual umbrella of the mom, and the mom was under the spiritual umbrella of the father, who was under the spiritual umbrella of the church, who was under the spiritual umbrella of Jesus. And whatever was coming to you, you had to accept, trusting that God was working on your authority figure. And even if your authority figure was mistreating you, to say anything, to speak up, to stand up, to resist, would potentially interfere with the work God was trying to do. And we would get stories of women who had reported their husband for embezzling at work, or for cheating on their taxes, or spoken up because the husband was abusing the children, and it interrupted God's plan. And what's funny, looking back at it, this is where that crazy messed up thinking comes in, is that in reality, it's saying that you as this little sinful woman are more powerful than God, because if you speak up, you're going to mess up God's plans. On this side of it, I can look back and see that. At the time, though, I trusted. I chose to trust, in spite of the fear, in spite of the doubt. Thankfully, I had a couple of hard limits, and one was physical abuse of my children beyond spankings. And when his mental illness brought him to a place where he was physically hurting the children beyond spankings, that's when I stood up. And that's when I filed for the divorce. And of course, then I believed I was even now a third-class citizen. So what I did was, because I was no longer qualified to serve in church, I wasn't even allowed to do nursery work anymore, because I had divorced a pastor. In one of my snarkier moments, though, when my ex said, "You're ruining my ability to be a pastor," I said, "No, I'm divorcing you because you aren't qualified." That was the one snarky moment I had in that time. But I opted to buy a Christian bookstore. And so I believed that God was going to use me by rescuing the dying bookstore in 2005. And in 2007, we went bankrupt, like most small, independent, struggling businesses did during that economic downturn. One of the things that marked my Christian experience was constantly looking for God in everything. Everything I did was reinterpreted in light of a God. And again, I don't know if any of you remember those moments where you looked up and you saw the dark cloud with the sun behind it, and you thought, maybe this is Jesus. Maybe this time it's Jesus. We had this like constant watch for when Jesus is going to come back, and this constant need to do everything we could because we didn't know when he was coming back. The other thing that happened is that I interpreted everything as though God was real. And for example, I needed a pair of shoes. I was running the Christian bookstore. We weren't making any money. My shoes were wearing thin, and I prayed and asked for a pair of shoes. And 2 days later, I got a pair of shoes in the mail. I interpreted that as God answering my prayer. And that was part of what eventually led me out. So my thirst for knowledge, my bookstore failed. I started dating. I married a second time. We moved. I married a Presbyterian, which was part of my journey out. We compromised between the fundamentalist and the Presbyterian faith with a Presbyterian church. And slowly, I started making my way out of faith. I went back to work in business. And one of the things I started doing was taking online courses to improve my business skills. And in doing that, I came across a class that looked interesting. And it was from Novel Harvey's, he wrote Sapiens, The History of Mankind. And he's a professor at Jerusalem University. And in that, he talked about how humans developed imaginary systems in order to help us coexist and have community. He talked about how businesses, government, money are all imaginary things. They are representative of our agreement with each other. A business is not the buildings, the people, the product. It is our agreement that those people, this building, and this product are a business and get the protections of that business. And as I was listening to that class, all of a sudden I realized God is an imaginary agreement with others. And I have been interpreting my world as God is there because everyone in my life agrees there's a God, which then brought me back to the story of the shoes. The truth was, the shoes, my mom had visited the weekend before and seen that I needed shoes. And so she mailed me a pair of shoes. That's where my shoes came from another human seeing my needs. But because of the maze that I lived in, I saw it as God, which is one of the points that I really want to bring home to folks, especially if you've grown up in a secular environment or very casual Christianity. When you're in this intense cult-like Christian environment, you reinterpret everything as proof of God. Ken, it looked like you might have had a question or just thinking.
Well, Gwen, you spent a lot of time recently talking about the imaginary.
Yes.
And how the imaginary affected you. So one of the questions I have is, and I have 100 questions, but one of the questions is, how do you distinguish between what you perceive to be the imaginary and the real?
So that's a great question. And one of the things I do a lot of now is say, I don't know. And so I have become comfortable with not knowing. And so I seek to find answers. I seek to know truth. However, I'm very comfortable not knowing, and I'm also comfortable being wrong, which allows me to be open to new ideas and to new information. And where I used to be the first person to say, I know the answer to that, or here's what the Bible tells us we should do, I'm now one to say, let's ask more questions. Let's investigate more. What can we know about this? And what do we actually need to know about this? It actually drives one of my friends a little bit crazy because I do spend a lot of my life going, I don't know. We were having a conversation about, where humans came from, and everybody had their theory. And I went, I find this theory kind of interesting. I think science indicates this, but I don't really know. And she's like, how can you be comfortable not knowing? I said, because I don't know. I don't know. And I think that's where I hold on to. And I imagine, there's that word imagine, I imagine that a lot of my ideas are still wrong, still growing, still evolving. but I'm open to that. Whereas in this imaginary world, everything was black and white, and there was nothing to learn from somebody else. So I love hearing other people's stories. Again, being in a nudist community where we do kind of check our religion and politics at the door, I have a lot of friends who are on all different levels of the political spectrum, the religious spectrum. And I tend to, instead of talking about the issues, if it comes up, I ask what led them to their conclusions. Why do they think this? What information do they have that led them to take this position? And it gives me a chance to learn.
If you had to equate your imagination versus your sense of reality on a scale, and you had to compare the imagination that you have and your reality that you perceive on a scale of, let's, the 1 to 10, where would imagination exist versus your reality?
I'm not really sure. I hope, and I think I've heard it said, and I think Matt Delahunty and Atheist Experience says this a lot. I want to believe as many true things and as few false things as possible, and continue.
Well, that's great. So then that begs the question: is how do you interpret truth?
So I think that's a great discussion item in a little bit. How's that?
Yeah, it's a lot of people. Personally, I believe that truth is highly overrated, and I believe that a lot of people aspire to what they perceive to be the truth based on their imagination. But I wondered about you. How do you perceive the truth?
So here's what I do know is that and I think most humans are this way, and maybe not, but I think most of us think that what we believe is true. Because if we thought what we're experiencing wasn't true, we wouldn't believe it. So if I'm standing, again, going back to like standing on the top of a building, I don't believe I can fly. So I'm not going to jump off the building thinking I can fly, and nothing is going to convince me that I can. However, give me the wrong visual, auditory inputs, and who knows what my brain might decide to do. So I do try to look at things as objectively as possible. But I'm also trapped in this brain and this body, and subject to my own experiences and background.
That's I think what you just said is an excellent observation, that you're trapped in your brain. And I believe that we are trapped in our perceptions and our brain, and that's all we have is our perceptions. But let's not get too deep into that, because we want to get back to your path from the purity, quote, culture to nudism. And are there any other questions at this point in time?
I think I did see one hand go up. Richard,
Did you?
have
Okay.
a comment?
I didn't.
Yeah, I majored in anthropology and archaeology in college until we studied all kinds of various aspects of religion. But I also think that our puny primate brains have an arrogance that is not justified. Here we have these wonderful physicists who come up with all these theories of how the universe works, and they have to come up with almost religious concepts like dark energy and dark matter because they can't explain the vast majority of what's happening in space. So I think we should be, the first thing any human should be is to be humble and to realize that our brains will never understand everything. We can't grasp the size of space. We can't grasp the number of stars. We can't grasp most of everything to do with the universe in which we live. We're live in a four-dimensional time or space, and maybe there are more dimensions. We may never even understand them or sense them. And I mean, I think, you know, human arrogance is sort of the root of all evil in many ways.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that's where I try to balance that risk by being comfortable with the idea that I could be wrong about a lot of things. And I probably am, you know. But I try to live my life smiling, finding as much pleasure as I can, and bringing as much pleasure to others as I can, while being respectful to myself and others, you know, trying to find that balance.
Excellent.
Well, Glenn, if you have more to present,
I've got a little bit more, and then we can, yeah. So, so again, being a nudist, I want to talk just a little bit about some of the specific nudist items. I do live my life trying to smile a lot. And I've found that shedding my clothes, shedding my past, shedding my beliefs, shedding my preconceived notions of other people based on age, height, weight, religion, politics, etc., has allowed for a lot more smiles and a lot more laughs. As a nudist, we're very much about relaxation, loving yourself, being free, and exploring. And I think exploration might be a key to that as well. If you're in a black and white world and the answers have been given to you from the Bible, there's not a lot of exploring beyond looking to what the Bible says. But when you can explore what others think, when you can explore what's been learned, when you can explore possibilities, there's a lot there. Purity culture taught me that guys can't control their sexual urges, that girls must control their bodies, otherwise guys might sin. Purity culture also teaches that if you think something in your head, it's as bad as doing it. So masturbation is sinful. Thinking a girl looks pretty is sinful because you're lusting after her. And girls were to be feminine, but not sexual, so as not to cause their brothers to sin. I remember sitting in the hot tub and realizing I was the only girl, and we were all naked, and there were 8 of us. And all of a sudden I was like, nobody's raping me. Nobody's even aroused. It's not me. It was like this light bulb that each person has their own capability to control their own behavior. I've also come to a place where I have, think, enjoy, masturbate, do what you want with your life. Respect yourself, respect others. But sex is not this big taboo item. So this has brought me to a more colorful thinking community. Our nudist community, again, respect others and all are welcome. I like to say the nudist resort I live at is like showing up at a family reunion and meeting family you didn't know you had, because we accept you for who you are. Now, we do occasionally get people who come for the wrong reasons, and they're quickly exposed and invited to leave. So a couple more things about me and my nudist life. Again, I used to be very much about putting on the armor of God, to the point that when I had my Christian bookstore, I even, when we were starting to struggle, brought in a pastor, and they spoke in tongues and they tried to slay the demons that were preventing my store from thriving. But in reality, we were just grasping at straws. We didn't know what we were doing. And my focus had very much been on trying to get them while they're young. And actually, so I served with Child Evangelism Fellowship for a while as well. Some of you may have heard of that group. They're the ones behind the Good News Clubs that meet in the schools. And their whole mission is to convert children when they're young. And the reason they do that is because that's when children are the most vulnerable to new ideas. And what I want now is for us all to approach life as much as possible with a childlike attitude of learning, but not simply trusting because someone's an authority figure. I now drive my favorite car. It's a shock yellow Chevy convertible Camaro. I live life the way I want to and enjoy it. Again, Ken mentioned earlier, Nude Radio is a station owned by my friends and neighbors. And on that station, I have had a show called Wednesday. I'm currently on hiatus and figuring out if that's what I want to do with my time right now. But Nude Radio is available on the Live 365 app. And basically, it just plays good music and gives announcements about nudist activities. And it is kind of funny, Nude Radio, because where is the picture? As Ken mentioned earlier. If you are interested in exploring a nudist life, I recommend the American Association for Nude Recreation. That's where you're going to find family-friendly links to nude places and some of the benefits. One of the other benefits that I found becoming a nudist is partly from my Christian upbringing about being a perfect Christian woman, and our society as a whole is striving for that perfect body, you know, not having ears that are too big and not having any rolls. When you're a nudist, suddenly you learn to accept that your body is you. And like so much of my Christian life, some of you may remember that quote about buffeting your body daily to bring it into submission, you know, that your body is your enemy. Paul in Romans talks about because of his body that he does the things he does not want to do and does not do the things he does want to do. And when you learn to love your body, when you learn to realize that this is me, this is all of me, and I'm the person who can take care of me, it's a lot easier to make healthy choices. The other thing I've found is community and acceptance. In my religious experiences, again, while we had community and we cared for each other, we also judged each other. We judged each other a lot. And those of you from some extreme Christian backgrounds, or especially Catholic backgrounds, you know, judging each other was a big part of it. In fact, there's even Bible verses that teach you to judge each other. Then there's the ones that say don't judge lest you be judged, but then judge so that you don't make a bad decision. Lots of contradictions. So I'd like to open up now. How has community enriched your life? And even this free thought community?
Okay, great. Fred, let's stop the screen sharing now, Jeanette,
Sure.
and move on to the discussion so we can see everybody more clearly. Fred, go ahead. Fred, you're muted, Fred. Yeah.
Okay, I just had to unmute myself, but as a, and I mean, you know, my parents weren't very religious. My mom was the daughter of a Baptist minister, but he died when she was 10 years old. But still, in high school, someone got me to go to a evangelical thing with the speaking in tongues and all that. And at the time I was, 17 and very, very